your external reality is an internal creation through your own physics of the mind that's operating through neurotransmitter function. And we are, in a way, having to turn ourselves inside out to see that reality. And once we do that, then you're no longer separate from everything, right? You're connected and part of the whole. And I think that's really what it comes down to, is to witness oneself through transcendent experience and realize we're all connected and come back out from that experience and kind of integrate that through your life's work, what you've been called to do.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to this episode of Onion Soup. And today we have a fun topic. We're going to be talking a lot about the quantum world and biology. But first, how are you doing today, Dr. Johnson?
Hey, yeah, I'm great, Dexter. Thanks for the opportunity to share some fascinating aspects of unusual physics going on in human biology.
Oh, yeah, for sure. So, first, tell us a little bit about what you do as a quantum biologist and your work in regenerative medicine.
Yeah, so I've got a PhD in biochem, a master's in molecular genetics, and a BSc double major in plant microbial sciences and biochem. So I've spent a lot of time kind of at university back in the 90s and learning about I guess the world of cell biology, the world of kind of biochemical pathways. And this kind of led me into a research career where I spent a lot of time looking at biological systems and regenerative medicine, how biology heals itself, how it has this capacity to take information that's stored and then generate an energetic field to provide context for producing that and repeating, going through this kind of cyclic system of being able to break down cells and then produce new cells. So this whole kind of context, a paradox really of the death and regeneration system happening within a cellular system that enables health and well-being and longevity within the organism. So it's that kind of got me onto a really interesting pathway of not looking at the stable side of cell biology or atomic theory, but really starting to look more into the unstable side of things, which is kind of where the boundaries between atomic theory and quantum biology kind of merge. So I spent a lot of time looking at ways of developing products and processes for companies in New Zealand. And I identified a number of different types of molecules. So I was still in the land of materialism, of the solid matter physics type thinking when I was working at a New Zealand government agency. And I identified a molecule from the islands of sheep, which had this ability to modulate cell-to-cell communication. So it could break cells and stop them from talking together, which then allowed the cell to make a decision as to whether it was going to proliferate or migrate or respond in a way that was appropriate for healing and regeneration. And so I also did a lot of work looking at the kind of regenerative capacity and the role that the surroundings of a cell, the extracellular matrix scaffold, the structure that cells sit within, and how that communicates information to the cell as to what phenotype or what type of cell it should be. So, you can take that environment and provide it as a scaffold for healing and regeneration. So I developed a product for a company that took the stomach of a sheep and converted that into an extracellular matrix scaffold for breast reconstruction surgery, for hernia repair, and for chronic wound healing. So it was all about trying to learn how biology works to provide the necessary kind of energetic and structural componentry, if you want to look at it in that kind of way, to heal and regenerate the body. And so my kind of work in the area of Manuka honey and regenerative healing kind of took me on a very, very different journey from the materialism type thinking that I had been, I guess, brought up into through a university type degree and science type career in that organization I was working in. And I had a really weird experience. That weird experience kind of gave me some insights as to the physics responsible for storing energy, and that stored energy is really what biology is tapping into for healing and regeneration. So we're talking about energy states that are very strange because they're not about the stable atoms. They're the energy states of the unstable atoms. And there's the beautiful locus, or a really unique location in biology that corresponds to the structure of a hexagon, the aromatic ring system. And what I found is that in the Manuka honey, the bees have been collecting various pollens from different plants, and the pollen germinates in the honey if you kind of watch it over a prolonged period of time. And what happens is that there's a light-based chemical reaction called photophentin chemistry that generates a molecule known as the hydroxy radical. And that molecule has this capacity to break down the compounds present within the pollen and convert it into CO2 and water. And so that process is involved in the germination of the pollen and converting the structure of the pollen into a pollen tube, and to send the sperm down the pollen tube to fertilize the ovum and make a new seed in the flower. So that process was taking place in the Manuka honey, and it was generating this hydroxy radical system that uses iron, that uses hydrogen peroxide, that uses these chemical reactions that only last for a nanosecond. So it's a billionth of a second, and that's as long as it takes to turn this molecule, the hydroxy radical, and attach it onto the aromatic ring. And as it's doing this very rapidly, it breaks the ring open and it releases the energy that's stored within the ring. So I found a system that biology is using naturally to store hydrogen inside the aromatic ring, and then a system that uses this hydroxy radical system to break open the ring and release that energy. And so those two systems work hand in hand for this higher state of energy, a conscious type energy that gives regenerative healing to the human body. And it was just like, whoa, this is very strange. It's not stable atom physics. It's unstable atoms contained in a hidden compartment. And it's like you break it open and release all this energy, and you can have interesting spiritual experiences. And it was like, okay, I'm kind of touching on this really, really sensitive area of science connected to consciousness. And it's like, how close do I want to get to unlocking some of this? And it's the time componentry of the human mind that's linked to unstable atoms, to the memory formation and the memory recall system. So it's not really able to be described adequately if we consider stable atom processes in biology.
Mhm.
And that's typically what we've been doing. We've been kind of focusing on the easy stuff, which is the stable atoms. But when you find something that is so unusual and you kind of come up against this brick wall of going, I can't use solid matter physics to really decipher and comprehend and understand the features of consciousness. And here's a system that's in Manuka honey that's associated with unstable atoms and the formation of new life in the seed. Then I've been using that new knowledge to look at biology in a different way through the functionality of unstable atoms. So that's kind of the science I've been doing, is a regenerative medicine, quantum biology based on unstable atoms. And it's like, well, it's very foreign to most scientists because they are very much focused on solid matter physics and the stable atom side of things. And that only allows you to see such a small percentage of the universe. Yeah. Let's start there.
Wow, that's a lot to unpack there. So, what I want to say is, one, that's amazing because that's kind of a lot of what I say about scientists is background on me. My bachelor's is actually in biochemistry. So, and I was gonna go get a PhD in neuroscience, and I decided to not do that and go a completely different route because I started to learn that there are so many things when you are studying science, really when you're studying anything, and on a collegiate level at the university, you I hate to say that you're limited, but there's a certain framework and a certain thought process that when you go along with that, it kind of puts blindfolds on you. So anyway, I really want to go back to the beginning of what you were talking about, and we started off talking about protein scaffolds. So let's start there, just in case we lost some people.
Okay. What is a protein, right? Well, you would say a collection of amino acids put together in a particular order that provides a functionality to, some people would want to call it like a molecular machine if it's an enzyme that's catalyzing a reaction, or you can have structural proteins, kind of like bricks and mortar that make up the human body, collagen being one of them. So what I was really doing was finding the bricks and mortar from an animal, from the sheep, and changing it enough so that I could remove all the cells from the sheep so that it was not going to cause an allergic reaction when it was put onto a person, so that they could facilitate and help the healing and regeneration that person was in need of. So, finding, I guess, a technology that is enabling and helping people to heal and regenerate is kind of what kind of drove my interest.
So, Dr. Johnson, I have a quick question.
Yeah,
So, I guess this is more of a personal question, right? So, when you start looking at breaking down different protein scaffolds and other animals in order for them to be utilized by the human biome, right? So, you were talking about there being an allergic reaction. So, you're referring to like that graft versus host disease issue that a lot of people typically have. And you can have this with something as large as any type of implant. Like you have a heart transplant,
yeah,
and people have issues. I'm just trying to make it make sense for other people.
yeah,
So
yeah,
so, then
sure.
you have a
I know
problem.
I do talk a very different language.
So,
Yeah.
a lot of times you have people who have like a heart transplant or something like that, or organ transplant, and they can't function as well, and they constantly get sick, and you're wondering why, what happened. How are you stripping down those, those walls, those barriers, in order for the healing to actually take place from one animal to another?
Yeah, yeah. Um, the the interesting aspect of, I guess, a sheep's stomach is the fact that it's involved in absorption, right? So you can look at it somewhat like a process that involves osmosis, the absorption of fluid through a barrier. And because of the natural tendency of the stomach to be involved in that process, then you can use osmotic pressure, have high salt on one side and water on the other, and use that to drive fluid through the material to facilitate the processing of it in order to remove the cells that would cause any antigenic issues. So what we find is that typically the structural parts of the extracellular material is not going to cause an, a problem with the immune system of the person who is having the implant put into them, as long as you've removed the kind of parts of the cells that are going to be causing the issues. So the epitopes are really on the surface of the cells. So if you remove the cells that are there and just leave behind the kind of bricks and mortar, then you can provide a material that's going to be functional and enabling for the body for healing and regeneration. Yeah.
So why go the route of sheep stomachs and not go the route of something perhaps like an axolotl, which has these amazing regenerative abilities? And I know that there's a professor I really want to study with the guy. He retired out in Irvine, California, who was doing research on this. So why go the route of sheep and axolotl?
Yeah, if you consider the stomach, there's a few ideas. One of them is the cells in the stomach are replaced quite regularly, quite quickly, every 7 days. So it does have a regenerative capacity within it as well. Um, the size of the material, the sheep stomach is quite a large size, and it has to be strong as well if you consider the functional properties of its mechanical strength in terms of hernia repair, right? Reestablishing that barrier. So it was really a number of factors that really played an important role in that selection.
Mm.
And, the strange aspect, the karmic aspect of that in relation to my own upbringing is that my father would take me to around to my auntie and uncle's place, and he would do home kill, and I would be collecting the organs from the animal as a child, and that kind of gave me context and a fascination about human biology. It gave me an insight into, I guess, some of the things that I was going to be doing in my future life. But yeah, those functional aspects of the stomach, its strength, its regenerative capacity, all played a part in I guess, the selection of that as a material. Plus, New Zealand's got lots of sheep.
That definitely helps if you have a lot of supply, right?
Yeah, yeah. And, it's now a business up in Auckland, New Zealand, that distributes over into the USA, FDA approved. So that company's gone from strength to strength. And my job was really to identify a manufacturing process that would give them a competitive advantage in the marketplace. And that was kind of my role in that. Yeah.
Oh, fascinating. I've always thought that if I were gonna go that route of research, I will want to learn how to utilize the pluripotent cells in order to control or try to went too far. For pluripotent cells, we're talking cellular biology here.
Yeah.
So we look at cells in their beginning stages before they start to differentiate or choose what they're going to be. Then, if you can catch them in that state, you can actually kind of control what they're. So that was like the very basic way of explaining that, but that's ultimately what I wanted my research to be if I were to go that route. But the
Yeah.
reason why I bring all those things up is because when we start talking about cellular biology and looking at things at the microscopic level, and then you're talking about unstable particles. One thing that I tell people, I like to talk to you about with our universe, is when you zoom into anything far enough we see that everything is energy, everything is particles, everything is connected. And our roles, at least at this point in our society, is finding those connections. And that's how we're able to find the different connections between humans and other biological organisms and utilize that for healing.
Yeah, the deepest I've got to is to, witness the decay of an atom
Mm,
within myself, which gave me the understanding relative to the human retina orientation, the eyes looking in rather than out, associated with the mind producing light. So that really shifted my perception of understanding in terms of atomic theory. And yeah, like when you get down to what's the difference between an atom in a rock versus an atom in a human being? Well, they both have, you know, protons, neutrons,
mhm,
electrons. They both have the forces, strong force, weak force, gravitational force, right? The electromagnetic force. So from that perspective, you can't really distinguish between them when you've zoomed down far enough to see the similarities.
mm,
So when we zoom back out again and we go, well, there is a separation between things. Well, that's in some sense a bit of an illusion because everything's fundamentally, like you say, made of the same stuff. So if you then look at things from the perspective of the similarities, it's a lot easier to then go, oh, okay, I can see the forces are essentially identical depending on the scale.
mm,
And it kind of comes back to, well, how do you integrate the conscious elements of experience? And how does that impact on atomic theory in terms of functionality? So, in this kind of scaffold side of things, you've kind of got the bricks and mortar, you've got your solid materials that you're working with. The cell biology is a dynamic system, it's a living system. It's able to respond to its environment and change dynamically based on the information that it's receiving from the external environment. So that kind of cellular matrix environment that informs the cell what to do, you can get the cell to change and de-differentiate if you get it to migrate. So that way of kind of stopping cells from being connected together and talking to one another, make them independent and get them to make a decision based on what they want to do is dependent on the environment that they're in. So they can undergo this process. It's kind of an epithelial to mesenchymal transition, going from a kind of sleeping state into a migratory state. And once they're migrating, they're sensing their environment. And when they're sensing their environment, they're responding to that and make changes according to the information that they're sensing. So that dynamic interplay between the external environment and the internal processes going on within the cell is happening at a remarkable speed, right? It's not happening on the basis of a physical exchange. It's such a dynamic interplay that it's happening photonically, right? It's an exchange of light information. And when you kind of consider atomically the exchange of information in light, you have to kind of think about the electromagnetic field of the atom that's then processing that information, giving a positional change in the electron corresponding to that photon energy that's been observed, integrated, and respond. Those dynamic processes through biophoton energetic exchange from inside to outside, outside to inside, is a very beautiful system to kind of explore, because it's linked to the living aspect of the cell. It's linked to the dynamic nature of cell biology and how it can change and respond appropriately to its environment. And the more I kind of got into thinking about that ability to adapt, to evolve, to change, it was that responsiveness that was really key to the functionality of living systems, the ability to respond. And that kind of got me deeper into more about atomic theory than it did in terms of cell biology. Cell biology is incredibly complex when you've got changes in gene expression based on the environment that the cell's within, and it's constantly changing depending on the changes happening externally. And so you have that very, very challenging situation of where do you start? Where do you stop? You take a Polaroid snapshot and you get a gene expression map, and you say that's what the cell is doing. Well, maybe at that instant of time, but not at the next. So it was kind of like, how do you reconcile the complexity into understanding functionality, but at a subatomic level, so that you can only just concentrate on four things, which are the gravitational, the strong, the weak, and the electromagnetic forces, which are common to all atomic systems. So that's kind of where I went, I'm not going to spend my time making measurements all the time and getting information based on Polaroid snapshots of given moments of time that a cell was responding to its environment. I'm going to learn about the atomic processes that are really responsible for responding to environmental change. And so it became more about, how does that happen? How do atoms respond appropriately in a given environment? And it's just like, that's a very, very different path from the paradigm that we're currently living in terms of, scientific method and the ideas of measurement, giving you answers that correlate to a reality. And if you haven't kind of integrated the paradox associated with measurement at that quantum mechanical level, then you're kind of stuck having to measure all the time to get the next lot of information, which is informing your decisions about what you should do. And so I went, nah, it's too much like hard work, right? You're kind of chasing your tail all the time, trying to catch up with the information, and you've got no predictive power at all, because you're currently wanting to understand the situation you're in. But you need the information from the measurement to inform you. So that was, there's always this kind of difference between what's really happening and the information that you've received based on the measurement.
Mm,
And that's a challenging paradox to break, because you kind of have to get to the point of understanding what the equilibrium state is when you're not measuring, so that the system's in balance and it's stable and it's going to stay there because you're not interacting with it.
mm,
And when you understand what that looks like, then it's like, that's what it's going to go to when I stop interacting with it. It's returning to that every time I stop interacting. I can predict what the outcome's going to be based on not interacting.
mm.
And that's too foreign a concept for most scientists to kind of grapple with, that by not measuring, we can predict outcomes.
Mm. Wow. So we bounced around a lot.
Yeah.
Cell biology, epigenetics, atomic theory, quantum mechanics. So, and I've had this burning question on my mind is what role does consciousness play in all of this? Because we're talking about the superposition of particles, right? So if you're not observing it, then it's in a quantum state, a superposition state. It can exist everywhere, literally at any time, because time doesn't matter at this point, right?
Yeah.
So when we look at things like the Copenhagen interpretation or the many worlds interpretation, how do those interpretations of quantum mechanics play into consciousness and the behavior of these particles in these cells?
So that's kind of a really difficult and challenging question. The way that I've approached things is kind of been directed by the product that I made from Manuka honey, right? So I guess I was lucky enough to identify this strange biochemical pathway associated with hydrogen going into the aromatic ring. And so I'm not having to deal with a many atom system, because there's only room for one atom at a time in the aromatic ring. Then it, in a way, does away with statistical probabilities associated with whether the atom is here or here or here or here or here, right? With measurement based on a distribution and probability, which is a quantum mechanical wave function type model. Whereas I've got a container that has a radius corresponding to 0.139 nanometers. So it's a discrete known geometry. It has a functionality which corresponds to 1.39 e to the negative 10 meters. And when we know the age of the universe is approximately 1.39 e to the plus 10 years, we can go, one looks very similar to the other. It's just got a different kind of exponent associated with it. So because of the confinement, because of the feature of that aromatic ring acting a little bit like a Faraday cage, it protects what is ever inside it from the external environment. So you can grow these unstable atoms housed in the ring, and whether they kind of release their energy or not is, in a sense, a more deterministic kind of framework. It's yes or no. And the amount of energy released is dependent on the binding energy of the atom that's inside. And the timing from which it operates appears to be linked to the half-life timing of the isotope. So all of a sudden, I've got a deterministic model based on one atom at a time, linked to a very kind of confined and defined structural process that is connected to proton tunneling. And so I looked at the features of the aromatic ring, and I found some relationships associated with the kind of Balmer line electron transitions, which are the motion of the electron in the hydrogen atom. And when I started to really kind of explore and study that, I started looking at the differential motion, like an entangled pair of positron and electron. and I looked at the hydrogen atom not as a proton and an electron, but as a kind of two photon based system with positron and electron pairing as a way of looking at the three quarks and the electron. So I changed the geometry of it in order to look at it in a way where the electric field and magnetic field could cancel one another out, which would give it the idea that it has no mass and it has no charge, which is a form in which the hydrogen atom can be in to allow it to tunnel. So it has no mass, has no charge, but has this electromagnetic structure that gives it the ability to pass through a magnetic barrier. And that's kind of what it needs in order to enter into the aromatic ring, in order to grow the unstable atoms inside. And so this whole kind of model that I've been kind of developing and exploring uses entangled pairs of positron and electron, and it looks at their distance that they're apart, correlated to an energy scale based on kilojoule per mole, meter per second, and that kind of fits into a gravitational framework of subatomics. So it's a big kind of shift away out of quantum mechanics. It's more of a deterministic model, but it links to the role that hydrogen plays in consciousness, because we've got this neurotransmitter that has the structure where hydrogen can be tunneling into this aromatic ring system of dopamine, can grow the atom inside. It can then release it based on its half-life to give the energy that the body needs for healing and regeneration. And so if the light that you're witnessing is connected to that process of time reversal, then you've got a way of storing information or memory and retrieving memory linked to isotope half-life decay time physics. And so by building a framework where, hydrogen has layered structures, the first layer, the Lyman line, correlates to UV light. The second layer, Balmer line, correlates to visible light. The third layer, the Paschen line, correlates to infrared light. So the layering of light structure within the hydrogen atom can give this beautiful process connecting hydrogen tunneling into the ring, forming memory formation and memory recall connected to light, which is observable. And when you look at the hexagon and its geometry, the aromatic ring system, it has some really, really unique features, like it's 6 times 120 degree angles correlating to 720 degrees, which is the kind of fermion 2 rotations in order to get back to where it started from. So those kind of features we've got the radius correlated to the age of the universe. We've got this feature associated with proton tunneling and hydrogen layers that have a connection to visible wavelengths of observable light and other wavelengths that are outside the observable spectrum. And so I started really kind of looking at the hydrogen biology of this proton tunneling connected to the neurotransmitter dopamine as the foundations for the experience of conscious reality. So it's connecting time and time reversal, forward and backwards, based on whether the hydrogen's going in or coming back out. It's got that kind of fermion 720 degree rotation. It's got this light vision aspect to it. And it just started to make a lot more sense to me when I started to use my own product, which was essentially growing unstable atoms in the aromatic rings based on the Manuka honey product. So bees are doing this. Right? I've got nanosite video footage of the unstable atoms and how they're emitting photons when excited by laser light. And it just really kind of took me down a different pathway away from the ideas of solid metaphysics, the ideas that the atoms only have protons, neutrons, and electrons, what I've kind of done is gone, I need a model that has symmetry in it because of that aromatic ring structure, room for only one atom. You've not got a binding partner. You've got no bonding going on in there. The geometry in there is going to be very, very different. It has to have a symmetrical geometry. Otherwise, it's going to look very, very strange because it's entering in a particular way because of the tunneling. And I've found a relationship in the charm quark associated with the positioning of the tunneling system that's going on. It's just a really kind of, it's a lot of information and it's quite complex and detailed, but it makes sense in terms of, well, in our biology, we have fight, flight, freeze. We can respond faster than conscious experience, right? We can actually the unconscious mind is operating and it does something. And that something that it does creates an outcome that's observable. And then the conscious mind catches up and observes the outcome that the unconscious mind has actually done. And because of the delay time between those two, it's connected to the half-life timing of the unstable atom system. It's providing a basis for, so really it's the unstable atoms associated with neurotransmitter function that's really providing this process, a mechanistic way of creating the experience we're having within the mind connected to time reversal and the deja vu type of experience, right? I thought I'd already had that experience. But no, you don't typically witness the initial process because it's too fast for the conscious mind to see. You see the time delay, time reversal system, and you can't tell which way it's actually operating, whether it's going forward or backwards. So we perceive our reality as moving forward, but it might be a little bit more like if you think about the replication of DNA and you got one strand with the RNA or DNA polymerase can come along and just, produce it in a beautiful direction, 3' to 5' or whatever. Whereas the other strand that's going in the opposite direction, you make as fragments, right? Little fragment, little fragment, little fragment, you stitch them together. So like the Okazaki fragments. So in a way, your conscious experience is a little bit like Okazaki fragments being emitted from the unstable atoms as they're releasing the information. And that kind of just really put me into a state of, okay, I really need to comprehend and understand the physics of the unconscious mind and its role in creating conscious experience, because that has a fundamental connection to health and well-being and our regenerative healing that's happening within our bodies when we sleep at night and when we dream. So that storage of hydrogen in the aromatic ring as an energy storage of light that facilitates healing and regeneration in our bodies while we sleep. While the conscious mind is out of the way, the unconscious mind can do its thing and release the energy that we've created during the daytime to kind of give us our healing and well-being at night. So,
Oh, wow. What that brings to mind is this book called, I want to say it's called Taking the Quantum Leap by David Wolf or something like that. And he explains how the way that we perceive reality is more, as you say, we experience it linearly, but in reality, it's more like, when you're watching a movie and you hit pause and it's just a snapshot of the movie. If we could take our lives and take a Polaroid snapshot of every increment moment in our life, that's more accurate to how reality is. But because it's playing by so quickly that we perceive it in this one linear strand moving forward. But as you were explaining earlier, when you look at the passage of information via through light through these hexane rings, it can actually go almost both ways, right?
It
So
is. It is going both ways.
right. So my question is so interesting because and I try not to lose too many people with the quantum tunneling and everything, but when we start talking about quantum tunneling, you mentioned quantum entanglement. Uh, when we're looking at these, and my knowledge on quarks are not is not the best. So when we look at quarks and leptons and these subatomic particles inside of the hexane ring, and we're talking about quantum entanglement, do both particles need to be inside of the ring in order for them to be quantumly entangled, or can one be inside and one be outside?
Yeah, it's fascinating. I would say the simple answer is there's an inversion taking place where it may be part of the holographic kind of information storage, and the radius, if you look at the speed of light cubed, is larger than the radius of the aromatic ring. And there's a weird kind of mathematics. It's something that I've kind of had to learn. You kind of take the meter. It's a dimensionless, right? It's a dimensionless mathematics where you're taking that meter distance and you're multiplying it to 1 over Planck, which is a reciprocal system to Planck, which then gives you a distance without a dimension that is enabling you to do comparative relationships between one thing and another. And when you're doing that kind of comparative relationship analysis, you kind of see these things and you go, that looks like that. And it's kind of like almost playing a card game where you've put all the cards down on the table and you can't see what the pictures are. And you turn one over and you see that, and you turn the other one over, and all of a sudden you start making matching pairs. And if in this entanglement system where positron electron created out of the vacuum in pairs to maintain the conservation of charge, then yeah, one of the particles could be in the aromatic ring and one of them could be outside. And in the two photon system where you've got pairing of electron positron and electron positron, you're ending up with the 3 quarks and the 1 electron, or the 3 quarks and the 1 positron. So my model that I've kind of developed introduces positrons into atomic theory so that I can see the matter-antimatter symmetry
Mm.
in order to understand how to look at something that's going to be in a symmetrical state rather than look at something that is asymmetrical, which is kind of what the basis is for solid matter physics, where cosmology is kind of missing antimatter, right? So by kind of looking at it in a different way, using a different model, you kind of get to see things that are not typically observable. So I can see mathematically the positron associated with the neutron because I've changed quark charge calculations. So the normal standard model for quarks is you're using fractions and you're adding them together, and you get in a proton, you have 2 up quarks and 1 down quark,
Mm.
and the up quarks plus 2/3 and the down quarks negative 1/3, and you add them together and you get +1, right? That's the standard thinking. And my model, because of the kind of inversion, and we're looking inside a system that is quite strange, and it's involving tunneling of the hydrogen. What I've done is I've said, well, if it's up, it's actually -1 charge, and if it's down, it's +1. So I've kind of, like a pinhole camera where the image is inverted, I've inverted charge based on orientation. And what that allows is if you've got your 2 up quarks in the proton, they're going to be negatively charged. So negative times negative is positive, times one of the down quarks, which is positive. You're still going to get +1 for a proton in this new kind of quark model. And so it's more of a boson model. rather than a fermion model, right? So it, like light, where light can have this ability to overlay, and you could put more and more light on top of itself and make a coherent light system with the laser, right? In a fermion approach, electrons can't occupy the same space at the same energy level, so they'd be button into each other, and they can't do that. Whereas in a boson framework, then you get this kind of beautiful overlay, and you can just keep putting more and more stuff in there, which makes it a little bit easier to kind of contend with. I'm only dealing with the electromagnetic field, I'm dealing with the gravitational field, I'm dealing with the forces. I'm not having to deal with the particles. So in a I guess a cheats way, I've gone and made things a lot easier for myself by looking at the forces and ignoring the particles. And what I did is I took the particle rest mass and I converted it into a distance in meters as a wavelength, and then I converted it into a kilojoule per mole, meter per second velocity. So the reason why I did that is I've got a contained environment with known kind of parameters where I've got one thing going in at a time, this hydrogen atom in a tunneling geometry, and I have to kind of build from that a comprehension of how particles are actually being created inside there, right? So you got light going in, but you get particles coming out. And to do that, you kind of have to start with the no particle perception and have a process that goes from one thing to another thing to another thing in a chronological set of steps that are mathematically based that give rise to the formation of particles. And that's when you see the mathematics, it's like, so we've got differences in velocity between two things, and the difference between them correlates to pi when we divide one by the other. And so all of a sudden you're getting kind of a circumference being generated. And then from that you can get an area. And from that you can get then a process that relates to surface area formation and then the volume. And so I'm kind of investigating very kind of basic things, but relationships between those basic things produce useful information to understand how four particles can be generated from this 2-photon light system of entering through this aromatic into the aromatic ring. And the beautiful thing of dopamine is that it has an amine, and the amine is what's delivering the hydrogen. So it's in close proximity to the hexagon aromatic ring on dopamine. Hydrogen is coming from that, so it's NH2 and NH3 plus, the ionization of the nitrogen. And we know that nitrogen's involved in inversion through quantum tunneling of hydrogen through the atom itself. So that's been demonstrated already. So it's a functional proton tunneling delivery system. That's what it looks like. And the time reversal processes. You think about the amino acid gets decarboxylated to activate the amine. And the amine is then functioning as a proton tunneling system. And then the monoamine oxidase removes the amine and stops the neurotransmitter from functioning. So the evolution of the system is all about control of proton tunneling and the time reversal system associated with conscious experience. So it's a really kind of, I think, a beautiful picture that's starting to come together to show us fundamentally what time is and how it's connected to unstable atom theory. Yeah.
Wow. Dr. Johnson, that is the first time I've had the opportunity to sit with someone who mathematically explained where really our conscious reality can come from. The way that we perceive everything, the way that the light transfers, the way that our biology is completely made up, that we've evolved. This, this is wonderful. But we only have a few minutes left. Can you for the audience, just explain really quickly how light how our interaction with the world around us interplays with light and our biological makeup.
I would say in this aromatic ring system, in the storage of light, our biology knows how to break open the ring and release that energy. And that's part of healing and regeneration. When that occurs, the energy is millions of electron volts. It's very, very high states of energy. And that causes entanglement to occur in molecular systems through the scattering of electrons. So there's an entanglement process fundamental to creating a human being and a biological system that's working in a quantum coherent way, right? So our body works collectively. That's also taking place externally with us as well, right? So we are part of and integrated into the very universe through the system, and our connection to it and our connections to one another are enabling and fostering, I guess, the sharing and revealing of these processes that are taking place, which are just phenomenal, right? When we start to kind of look at the role of those living aspects of the unstable atoms. Yeah, we're emitting our energy in order for other people to see us. We're emitting our coherent light. It's not like we are pixelated unless you go right down to the Planck scale, and then it's just too weird for people to comprehend. But if you think about being able to see somebody when your retina point inward, you kind of have to take the ideas of your external reality as an internal creation through your own physics of the mind that's operating through neurotransmitter function. And we are, in a way, having to turn ourselves inside out to see that reality. And once we do that, then you're no longer separate from everything, right? You're connected and part of the whole. And I think that's really what it comes down to, is to witness oneself through transcendent experience and realize we're all connected, and come back out from that experience and kind of integrate that through your life's work, what you've been called to do. So I feel like I've had a calling, and I'm enjoying the revealing of my own personal experiences and the challenges that places at this given time. But yeah, we are one with the universe, definitely.
Wow, thank you so much, Dr. Johnson. Honestly, it's been truly amazing. And I've had a great time discussing. I've learned so much. Well, and thank you everyone for tuning into this episode of Onion Soup. Hope you had as much fun as I did. Until next time, everyone. Bye.
Brilliant. Bye. Thanks, Dexter.